tracking developments in the trial of 3 Tacoma police officers in the death of Manuel Ellis. Thanks for joining us. I'm Christine Pei. Ellis died while being restrained by police in March of 2020. Officers Matthew Collins, Christopher Burbank, and Timothy Rankin are all facing charges in his death. King 5 is live streaming the entire trial from opening to closing statements. We take you now to the courtroom live.
proceedings.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Mitchell, before the break, we were talking about your work at Howard University and a little bit of your background. Can you tell the jury, are you licensed to practice medicine?
Yes,
Where are you licensed?
in Washington, D.C.
And how long have you been licensed?
In D.C. for the last 9 years. Prior to that, licensed in New Jersey. Prior to that, licensed in Texas and New York. That probably rounds out where I've been licensed before.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, are you board certified in any areas of medicine?
And I am board certified in forensic and anatomic pathology.
And what does it mean to be board certified?
Anytime someone is board certified, that means that they've done all the requisite education and then taken all the requisite tests. In medical school, you take 3 steps, and then you take your specialty boards, and then you take a subspecialty board. My specialty board is anatomic pathology, and so I've done everything to take that, and then my subspecialty board is forensic pathology, and I've done everything to take that, and I've been practicing for over 10 years, so I had to recertify, take another test for that recertification, and then I do a quarterly maintenance of my certification as it relates to my boards.
Great, thank you. Can you tell the jury, what is pathology? What can you just describe that area of medicine, please?
Sure. Pathology is the study of disease. Pathos is disease and ology is study, so it's the study of disease. And we diagnose disease or help to diagnose disease for a living.
And you said that you were board certified in both anatomical pathology and then had a subspecialty in forensic pathology. Is that right?
Yes.
And so tell us, what is anatomical pathology?
Anatomic pathology, when I described my role as the chair of pathology at Howard University, I talked about tissue coming off of an individual during surgery, and that tissue being looked at under a microscope to render a diagnosis, and that diagnosis given to the surgeon so the surgeon can develop a plan of care for that particular person. So anatomic pathology, under anatomic pathology, there is subspecialties of surgical pathology. That's what I've just described. Autopsy falls under anatomic pathology, as well as forensic pathology is anatomic pathology. So the general term is anatomic pathology.
And what does a forensic pathologist do?
We perform examinations, whether full examinations or autopsy examinations or external examinations, for the purposes of establishing cause and manner of death. And those can be from disease or injury. The Forensic Pathology Fellowship, that year-long fellowship, is to begin teaching a fellow to be able to discern or understand how injury can cause death.
And is that the same as what we might see on TV as a medical examiner, forensic pathology?
So a medical examiner is the title given to a forensic pathologist who works for a government. So they're often synonymous, but I'm still a forensic pathologist even though I don't work for government anymore. I'm still a forensic pathologist.
All right, so prior to Howard University, where did you work?
The city of Washington, D.C., in the office of the chief medical examiner.
And what did you do there as in the office of the chief medical examiner in D.C.?
I was the chief medical examiner for 7 years.
And what years were you the chief medical examiner in Washington, D.C.?
2014 to 2021.
And what did your duties involve as the chief medical examiner in D.C.?
I provided oversight to all death investigations in the city. My job was to be the chief administrator for the office. I kept a caseload, did my own forensic pathology cases, as well as ensure quality and safety for the organization. I also was the mass fatality manager for the city in that role.
And what does that mean to be the mass fatality administrator?
Manager.
Manager, sorry.
Well, we just got out of COVID, and every jurisdiction had to handle an increased amount of deaths from this public health emergency. So I set up, part of my job was to set up the disaster morgue operations, to bring in the National Guard, the Army Reserve, to ensure that families got treated appropriately, that the remains got treated appropriately, that there was proper final disposition towards burial or cremation, to make sure that the fatalities didn't stack up, for lack of better terms. That's part of that mass fatality manager, and then investigate those deaths. So that's an example, but we were prepared for, as you can imagine, in the nation's capital, prepared for any mass casualty event, anything that would cause a lot of deaths in the District of Columbia. My job was to make sure we were prepared for that.
In the Washington, D.C. area, about how many death investigations was that office responsible for on a yearly basis?
We were about, I would say about 4,000 deaths a year.
And so over the time that you were there, do you have any idea how many death investigations you were kind of in charge of?
Well, I was in charge of all of them. So, so all 4 years, all 7 years times 4, what is that? 21,000 death investigations that would have required me to have a part of.
And during the time that you were in Washington, D.C., were you also involved in teaching?
Yes.
And where were you teaching?
I was clinical faculty at George Washington, as well as clinical faculty at Howard University.
And other than your role as the chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., did you have any other roles in the government for D.C.?
When I, well, as part of that chief medical examiner role, I was the chair of the Infant Fatality Review Committee, the Child Fatality Review Committee, the Opioid Fatality Review Committee. I created a Violence Fatality Review Committee. So I had a lot of initiatives in supporting the government. I ended my tenure there for the last 6 months doing double duty, where I was also the deputy mayor for public safety and justice. And so EMS, fire, law enforcement, the prison, the jail, human rights, all of those offices reported to me for my last 6 months while I still was the chief medical examiner.
And so prior to your time in Washington, D.C., where did you work?
I was in New Jersey. I was the assistant state medical examiner in charge in New Jersey.
And for how long were you the assistant medical examiner in New Jersey?
2 years.
And what years was that from?
Well, 2.5 years, 2011, August 2011 to January 2014.
And can you give us an idea of what your duties were there as the assistant medical examiner in New Jersey?
I was the chief of a region, which was Essex, Hudson, Passaic, and Somerset counties, New Jersey. This is where Newark, New Jersey is. This is where Jersey City is. So pretty urban population in the state. And because there was no state medical examiner while I was there, I doubled as the state medical examiner. So my role was to also oversee both the northern and southern regions. The southern region was Cape May and Cumberland counties, as well as Atlantic County, Atlantic cities down in that area. And then I also had the role of mass fatality manager for the state, and then I was also part of the state shooting response team, which is anyone that died at the hands of law enforcement, where a state trooper discharged a weapon to kill someone. Part of my role was to be part of that investigative body.
While you were in New Jersey, do you have any idea how many death investigations you supervised or that you were involved in?
I think roughly there in the northern region, I think we're seeing close to about 2,500 cases a year, and I was there 2 years. And
so you said you were also involved in some officer-involved fatalities. Is that right, in that role?
Yes.
And so give us an idea of what that looks like. What were your job responsibilities with respect to that?
Anytime there was a state shooting that killed someone, I would have to respond to the scene no matter where in the state. And so I would go to the scene along with investigators and perform and help perform the death investigation on those scenes. And then my job was to perform the autopsy on those cases.
In your role as medical examiner, both in D.C. as well as your time in New York, it sounds like you worked closely with law enforcement, is that right?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury kind of how that works in terms of the interaction between a medical examiner and law enforcement?
Well, you all, I'm sure, have physicians or know someone who has a doctor. And we, in forensic medicine, we require, just like any other doctor, we want a history. We want a history of information surrounding circumstances. Any information that we can gather, we want to have that information. In most jurisdictions, law enforcement is the provider of that information, particularly in cases of trauma and in criminal cases. We do have we do gather information from families, and if they've gone to the hospital, we get medical records and EMS records, things of that nature. But most of the time, we're relying heavily on the information that's provided by law enforcement for the circumstances, particularly the circumstances of death. And so law enforcement is always and has always been involved in all the offices that I've been in.
When you were in New Jersey, were you involved in any sort of teaching at that time?
Yes.
And can you tell us about that, please?
Taught in New Jersey Medical School lectures. I don't remember I don't think I had a full appointment of any type while I was in New Jersey.
Prior to working in New Jersey as a medical examiner, did you work anywhere else as a medical examiner?
Yes, I worked in Harris County, Houston, Texas.
And tell us a little bit about your job there.
That was my first job out of fellowship. I got there in 2007. Soon after that, 2008, 2009, I was elevated to the Assistant Deputy Chief Medical Examiner. I ran all death investigations for Harris County, Houston, Texas. We saw about 16,000 death calls a year. We did about 500 homicides a year. I had about 20 death investigators. We ran a 24/7 operation. And so that's kind of where I cut my teeth on day-to-day death investigation, as well as leadership of a budget, and understood that I may have a future in leadership.
And at the time that you were in Harris County in Houston, were you also involved in teaching at that time?
Yes.
And can you tell us about that?
We had rotating fellows that, just like I did a fellowship, there would be fellows that would rotate there. We had rotating residents while we were there. And so I taught those residents and fellows.
Right, and I've been kind of working backwards, as you can tell. Prior to Houston, can you tell us, did you work someplace else, or were you in medical school, or what?
No, I was at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City. That's where I did my fellowship under Dr. Charles Hirsch. And I was there for a year, from 06 to 07. Prior to that, I was at George Washington. That's where I did my residency in anatomic pathology, ended there as chief resident. And prior to that, I was at New Jersey Medical School, UMDNJ, New Jersey Medical School in Newark, New Jersey, where I did my medical school. And prior to that, I did 2 years, a year and a half, at the FBI. I was one of the first black men in FBI DNA laboratories. So that's where I got interested in forensics back in 97, 98. And then before then, I was an undergraduate at Howard University, biology major, chemistry minor.
So it sounds like for the last 16 years, at least, you've been kind of overseeing and managing and conducting death investigations. Is that right?
I haven't done the math, but it's been a while.
All right. And in your experience, what kinds of deaths usually warrant an investigation by a medical examiner's office?
Any violent and suspicious non-natural deaths require an investigation by a medical examiner or coroner.
And what do you mean by that? Violent natural deaths?
So there are 5 manners of death. There are 5. So homicide, suicide, accident, natural, and undetermined. There are 5. In all of the jurisdictions that I've worked, if you're not, there's going to be a lot of negatives in this comment, so I apologize. If you're not a forensic pathologist, then you cannot certify anything other than natural. So if you're a rank and file doctor or a regular pathologist in a hospital or a community physician, you can only certify a death that is natural. All of the others, homicides, suicides, accidents, and undetermined, if those are the circumstances, those cases have to come to a medical examiner for examination.
And during your career as a forensic pathologist, can you give us an idea of how many autopsies you personally have performed?
Personally, I've done probably a little over 2,000.
And how many of those autopsies that you've done have involved in-custody deaths?
Probably about 7.
And what does the term in-custody death mean?
So the federal definition that is found in the Deaths in Custody Reporting Act is that deaths that occur that begin during pursuit by law enforcement include arrest, include transport and booking, short-term and long-term jail, and incarceration. So in custody, that's the spectrum, and any death that occurs on that continuum will be considered a death in custody.
So is that different than, let's say, a shooting fatality by a police officer?
No.
It's all part of the same, or considered the same?
It would be considered the same.
And does Mr. Ellis's death, and I know you're familiar with this case, does that kind of fit into that definition of in-custody death?
Yes.
All right, I want to ask you a little bit about your background in terms of publications and peer-reviewed articles. Have you published at all or had done any peer-reviewed articles?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Just a modest amount. I've published 13. I have a couple that are in the pipeline now. So about 13. The one that's probably most germane to this is the position paper by the National Association of Medical Examiners that functionally gives guidance on how death in custody should be investigated, examined, and reported by forensic pathologists or coroners. That was written in 2017.
And so you said that was is that organization called NAME, is that right?
Yes, NAME, or the National Association of Medical Examiners.
All right, so and that sounds like it's related to in-custody deaths?
Yes. The organization is a group of national and international forensic pathologists, medical examiners, and coroners that come together to share academic and thoughts about how to do the work. It's a professional society. And the position paper was written to give guidance to those of us that do this work on how these should be handled from a practical standpoint. What types of pictures should be taken? What type of information should be gathered when coming to the diagnosis? Those types of things are in this paper.
And is that paper something that the members of NAME or other medical examiners follow?
I know many medical examiners that do, but I don't know if all do. It has been placed out into the peer review literature for people to follow. I don't know how well people follow it.
And I think you said that you were part of NAME's Death in Custody Committee, is that right?
Yes, I was the chair.
And what is that?
Well, it was an ad hoc committee that mandate was to develop these guidelines, for lack of better terms. That committee has sunset. Its primary purpose was to pull together a group of forensic pathologists from all over the country to make sure that we had a clear perspective from different types of jurisdictions or places where people work to develop consensus, if you will, on how to handle these types of cases. And so once that paper was completed, then that committee was dissolved.
And is that the only paper that NAME has put out with respect to in-custody deaths and how to investigate them?
Yes, to my knowledge.
And have you also done any lectures in forensic pathology?
Many.
Can you just give us an idea of what kind of, how many and what kind of topics you've lectured on?
I mean, I've lectured on opioid abuse, use and abuse, infant and child fatality, blunt force trauma, gunshot wounds, sharp force injury, drownings, hangings. There's no topic in forensic medicine that I haven't lectured on.
I want to talk a little bit about your experience as an expert witness. Have you served as an expert witness before?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell us in what context and how often you've done that?
The majority of it in the context of criminal proceedings called by the prosecutor when I was the government's forensic pathologist, whatever level I was at the time, on cases that I performed myself, or when I was the chief in places when those forensic pathologists were not available, then I would testify to the reports that I've reviewed. So I've done that several times. I've done it as an expert witness on cases of death in custody, as well as in cases on large federal opioid abuse cases.
So let's talk about your work outside of being a medical examiner expert witness, meaning when you were a government medical examiner expert witness. Can you tell us a little bit about how much work you've done in the expert area and what types of matters you've done when you're not serving as the government medical examiner?
So most of my work has outside of government has been in the civil space. I've done some consultation on cases where families thought there was wrongful death on the side of the family asking me to look at something. Something happened to an individual in a hospital and the doctors, lawyers asked me to look at something. I've done expert review on several death in custody type cases and have given depositions. But as far as court testimony on the private side or the non-medical examiner side, I've only testified probably about 3 times outside of my role as a government medical examiner.
And in any of the private work you've done, I guess I'll call it, the outside of your role as a government medical examiner, have any of those cases involved in custody deaths?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury, what were you asked to do in this case?
I was asked to look at all of the information and give my independent opinion as to cause and manner of death.
All right. And what materials did you examine in order to kind of reach opinions? Well, first I should ask you, did you come to opinions with respect to Mr. Ellis's death?
Yes.
And what materials did you look at in order to form your opinions?
Well, without my report in front of me, then I won't be able to tell you exactly what I reviewed, but I reviewed video, I reviewed witness statements, I reviewed testimonies as to depositions. I've reviewed the autopsy report, the toxicology report, the autopsy photos, the autopsy diagram, reports from the original forensic pathologist and supplemental reports. More than that.
All right. If I may approach, Your Honor. Thank you. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 479 and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes.
And what is it?
This is a copy of my consultation report dated July 14th, 2022.
And if it would assist you, I'll have you keep that document up there. So as I ask questions, if you need to refer to it, just please let us know that you're referring to it. Okay?
Thank you.
So I asked you about what materials you reviewed. Can you take a look at your report and see if there's anything kind of in broad categories that you missed or maybe didn't speak to already?
The Tacoma fire report, incident report, officer scene drawings, full body x-rays. I looked at the histology slides under the microscope, as well as medical records from Manuel Ellis.
And as a forensic pathologist, would you ordinarily review the types of materials that you just described, including witness statements, videos from the scene, that kind of thing?
If available, yes.
And why would you want to see that information as a forensic pathologist?
Well, part of our job in most jurisdictions is to establish the circumstances and how those circumstances may have led to someone's death. That's the manner of death. And so you want as much information as possible, particularly in death in custody. We want as much information as possible, especially if there's video present, if there's statements surrounding what happened. You want to be able to understand as much as possible when you're developing your diagnosis.
All right. So whether you're acting as the government medical examiner or in a private capacity as you are here as an expert witness, it sounds like you would in either scenario, you would look at that same type of information. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's just give a little bit of overview, if you could. Can you just explain to the jury when an autopsy is done, first of all?
So when an autopsy is performed, it's going to depend upon the jurisdiction, depend upon what city, state, municipality you're in. Usually the government and the law will set what cases have to be reported to that office for an examination. And then when a body comes into an office, the goal is to establish cause and manner of death. And if you can establish cause and manner of death with an external examination, and it is not a case that is a suspicious case, an apparent natural case, or something of that nature, then oftentimes an external examination is done. An autopsy is going to be done when you want to make sure that you've recorded every bit that happened, every injury, every disease process. You want to make sure that you do an autopsy. When you need to establish cause and manner of death, and the autopsy is the only way that you can establish cause and manner of death, then you want to do an autopsy. And then when you have evidence that you need to recover, then you need to do an autopsy. And then lastly, public health concern. If there is of great, not just public health, but public concern, is there of great public concern, then you would, most jurisdictions are going to do a full autopsy.
Can you tell us just generally, what does an autopsy involve in terms of the examination?
An autopsy starts with an external examination. You receive a body. You look at that body just like you go into your doctor that you normally go to, your OBGYN, your surgeon. You're going to go. And first, every good autopsy starts with a history, right? So we don't just do the exam. We need all the history. That's why the information is so important. But once the body gets there, you document how you receive the body. So if there's medical intervention, if there is injuries that you can see without cleaning the body, all of those things you want to document how the body was brought to you. You'll weigh the body, you'll measure the body's length. And then usually medical interventions are removed if those exist. You're going to document all the injuries or disease externally, both front and back, and you're usually going to take pictures all along the way. You know, take pictures of the head and neck all the way to the soles of the feet, particularly in death in custody. And then a Y-shaped incision is performed from the tops of the shoulders. For the record, I'm pointing to my own shoulders, to the middle of the chest, down the belly. That's a Y-shaped incision. And then for death in custody, you really want to do that layer by layer, right? So you want to look at from the skin to the skeletal muscle and soft tissue, from the skeletal muscle down to the bone, and then look at the bones for any fractures. So all that happens. The chest plate is then removed so that you can gain access to the organs within the chest, the heart and the lungs, and all of that is inspected. You're also looking for evidence of fluid in any of the cavities. And then there's usually an organ by organ removal, surgical removal of each organ, and those organs will be weighed, inspected, and oftentimes pictures are taken of each organ as well. Again, documenting the presence or absence of injury or disease. That's done with every organ in the body, from the chest down through the belly. And then you want to look in the head. There's a dissection of the scalp, and there's removal of the cranium. There's appearance, and you want to make sure that you document the brain, removal of the brain, and the weighing of the brain as well. And then most autopsies, particularly, I won't say most autopsies, but autopsies that are death in custody, there may be special procedures you do, like a forensic neck, where you're doing a layer by layer neck dissection of the neck, anterior and posterior, or in the front or in the back. And then you also want to look and sample anything from each organ, put it under the microscope, prepare it to be looked at under the microscope. That microscopic examination is going to happen several days to weeks later, because that tissue has to be processed to be looked at under the microscope. Fluid is taken at an autopsy, so your bile from your gallbladder, oftentimes the fluid behind your eye, which is called vitreous, is going to be taken. Blood and urine will be taken for any testing that needs to happen for toxicology, for the study of presence or absence of poisons or the chemicals in the body.
And was an autopsy done on Mr. Ellis?
Yes.
And do you know when that autopsy was done?
I believe it was done on March 4th, 2020.
Okay. So,
I think it's now been removed. Proceed.
thank you. All right, you talked about, so you said on March 4th, 2020, the autopsy was done?
Yes.
All right. And I think you said a moment ago that the body's kind of received and then processed and documented along the way. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. I want to have you take a look at exhibits 271B and then C and D. And I believe these have all been admitted, Your Honor. And if so, may we publish? Do you need a larger cup for some water?
No, I can.
Okay.
My little cup.
Two 271A, 271B, and 271C.
No, B, C, and D, Your Honor.
B, C, and D.
Yes.
B and C have been admitted. What's that? And I have 271D through N. So you
Can I
can proceed.
publish? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. All right, we're going to put it up on that screen next to you, and then there's also on the screen for the jury over here. And if it's easier for you, Dr. Mitchell, feel free to step down to this if you want to point at things.
Oh, okay.
Can you just explain to the jury, like, why this picture? I mean, is this part of an autopsy?
Yes. For the record, I'm looking at the state exhibit 271B, and it's listed with a case number 20-0519. And this is of a black man who has several medical interventions in place. And yes, this as it sits here would be functionally an as-is photo, the body as received by the medical examiner.
Okay, and when you say that he has medical intervention, can you just point to what you're talking about there? And if you want to
Yes,
step down, feel
I can. Is Your Honor, is it okay that I step down?
Yes.
So he has an endotracheal tube that's going down his throat. You can see here with a balloon attached to it. He has several EKG tabs on his shoulders. For the record, I'm pointing to the screen. He has defibrillator pads on his upper right chest and lateral left chest. He's clad in blue or purple shorts with a yellow P. And then there's an intravenous or IV access in the left antecubital fossa or left forearm.
And in your experience, is that typical in terms of what you might see in the medical examiner's office if EMS or paramedics, fire, somebody had tried to engage in life-saving efforts for him?
Yes.
All right. Could we take a look at 271C, please? And what does this picture show? You can, sorry, make you keep getting up and down. Maybe stand up for a little bit. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this picture is showing the bottom half of the individual, the shorts. It shows EKG tabs on the calves. Bilaterally, there's additional clothes in the background of this. There's sneakers on, white sneakers on, as well as black socks. There's additional evidence in the bag, and then there's some injuries that are associated with the lower extremities of the legs and knees in this particular picture as well.
And again, is that the kind of thing that you would just document as a medical examiner, showing the arrival of a body and the condition of a body from a scene?
Yes.
All right. If we could take a look at 271D. And what's the purpose of this?
Part of the role of a medical examiner or coroner is to ensure proper identification. So anytime there is identifying information on the body, then there should be pictures taken of that identifying information. And in this picture, it has not only the standard case number placard for this particular county's medical examiner's office, it also has the identification bracelet on the leg.
And is that something that the Pierce County medical examiner would have put on Mr. Ellis?
Yes.
All right. And it shows his name, his case number, and his date of death. Is that right?
Yes.
You can have a seat. Thank you. Dr. Mitchell, did you perform the autopsy on Mr. Ellis?
No.
Who did the autopsy on Mr. Ellis?
Dr. Thomas Clark.
And do you know Dr. Clark?
I do not.
Have you ever met him or spoken to him at all?
No.
Does the fact that you didn't perform the autopsy in this case impede your ability to offer an opinion on the cause and manner of Mr. Ellis's death?
No.
Why not?
Well, Dr. Clark provided an adequate report. He provided pictures as well as tissue samples from his evaluation. And then I had access to all of the investigative information that allowed for me to come to a medical opinion.
Now, you mentioned that there was some microscopic evidence that is typically performed. I think you talked about taking samples from various parts. Is that stuff did you actually review those?
Yes.
And can you tell us about your kind of microscopic review of the histology, the slides?
So I reviewed the original slides that were performed by Dr. Clark, and for the record, I'm going to refer to my report, and which included heart, lung, liver, kidney, and brain sections, and I looked at those under the microscope. The couple things stood out during my histology review or review of the material under the microscope, was the presence of blood in the airway in the lungs, as well as food material in the airway in the lungs. And then in the liver, there was focal areas of inflammation in the liver. Those were probably the biggest findings surrounding the review of the histology. When I came to Tacoma to take a look at additional sections, I put in additional sections of tissue, primarily to look more, find out if I could see more in the lungs and look for fibrosis or any major scarring of the heart. And in that report, I did not see scarring of the heart, but I was able to see iron, which is a breakdown product of blood, in the sections of the lung.
And when was it that you came to Tacoma and had additional slides made to review?
I will be honest with you, I don't remember the exact date that I came to Tacoma for those slides.
Okay, you did a supplemental report, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, let me show you an additional document, see if that helps you refresh your memory. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 480. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And is that the supplemental report that you prepared?
Yes.
All right. Does that help you in terms of when you came to Tacoma and had additional slides done?
Yes, it does.
All right. When was that?
July 21st, 2022.
All right. So help us understand how you could make additional slides of tissue from Mr. Ellis's body when he died in March of 2020.
Part of the role of the medical examiner is to create a report and to gather specimens that if another qualified forensic pathologist has the ability to review, then that forensic pathologist could come up with a diagnosis that is reasonably connected or consistent with your diagnosis. So as a part of what we do as medical examiners is we take that tissue, there's small pieces of tissue from each organ, and we put small pieces of tissue in what we call a stock jar. And by accreditation guidelines, that stock jar, which is filled with preservative, and then small pieces of your heart, your lung, your liver, your kidney, your brain, that will be put and stored for anywhere from it could be up to 3 years. Homicides in most jurisdictions, they will be on the shelf for 10 years. So that if anyone needs to come and look at more tissue, they can. In addition to that, the tissue that's prepared and put on the slide, that tissue is preserved in wax, and that's the small 5-micron thick slices that are placed on glass slides so that you can look under the microscope at these pieces of tissue. Those are called blocks. Those paraffin blocks or wax blocks are also kept for up to 3 to 5 years after the autopsy. So being a couple years after the autopsy, I was able to come. The current medical examiner was able to show me the tissue that was still in the stock jar. She was able to make those sections that I said, can I have an additional section here I want to look at? Can I have additional section there I want to look at? And can you stain it properly as I'm asking? And so the medical examiner allowed for that. That allowed me to to look at more tissue, not only from the stock jar, but also from the those paraffin wax blocks.
And why did you think it was important to look at additional slides and have those additional tissue samples made?
For me, anytime I'm doing a second examination, I want to try to look at as much as I can through my own eyes and not just rely on the report that has been given to me. So I thought it was important, if it was available, to be able to look at it, so I'm as objective and as independent as you know, as I need to be in these types of cases.
I think you mentioned a minute ago when I asked you about the materials that you reviewed that you also looked at other expert reports in this case. Is that right?
Yes.
And can you just tell us, is that typical for a medical examiner to look at expert reports from other experts?
Yes. When, you know, as a forensic pathologist, I'm a generalist. So, you know, I'm receiving the case, and there's a lot going on with the case. So good forensic medicine, and this is in the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report in 2006, good forensic medicine, you really want it to be connected to a hospital or another health delivery entity so that you can have access to those experts. So if it's a case that has an issue surrounding, you know, pulmonary, if you can find someone that can look at the case and give you their idea about what's happening with the pulmonary system, then you want to do that. If it's a heart case and you want someone to take a look at the information and tell you what they think from their clinical expertise. So it is not, and then it is not foreign to do that. And then we do it on a regular basis when it comes to brain pathology and cardiac pathology. That's something, and pediatric pathology. So brain, cardiac, and pediatric. Those are usually mainstay consults, if you will, that a forensic pathologist will get when needed.
And what about in this case? What other expert reports did you look at or did you rely on?
Several. I mean, I had and I'm looking at my report, I relied on a cardiologist who gave his opinion, as well as, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my report. As well as, particularly in my report that's influenced my report, an emergency room physician as well.
And I think you also mentioned earlier that Dr. Clark performed the autopsy in this case. Is that right?
Yes.
And did he issue a report?
Yes, he did.
And do you remember, did he issue one report or more than one report?
I believe he issued an initial report and then an addended report.
And did you review those documents as well?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
Well, he, as the pathologist who performed the autopsy, he's the closest to all of the information from a pathologist standpoint. And so I thought it was important to review his report.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 250. Tell me if you recognize that document.
Yes.
And what is it?
This is the postmortem examination report issued by Thomas Clark, date of examination March 4th, 2020. It is a 5-page report, and it is signed, as it appears here, in May of 2020.
What's the date on it in May of 2020?
It looks like May 19th. I don't know if that is a 1 or a 9.
Okay. pages. I'm just looking for another binder here. Right, you made mention of the fact that Dr. Clark also issued a supplemental report. Is that right?
That is correct.
I can't seem to find the binder that has 550 in it. Exhibit 551. Do you have it someplace? I see.
No. I don't know if it's in binder further down. I can't get to it electronically.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll just have it put up electronically. Sorry about that. And only for the witness, please. Yeah, I must be misreading the numbers. All right. Do you see that Exhibit 551?
Yes, I do.
And what is that, 551?
It is listed as a forensic pathology consultation report concerning the death of Manuel Ellis, and it's dated May 24th, 2021. This is page 1. If there are other pages, I don't see them here.
Okay. Could we just kind of scroll through the additional pages? Thank you. How many pages is it?
4 pages, 5 pages.
And you reviewed that supplemental report as well?
Yes.
And what did Dr. Clark conclude was the cause of Mr. Ellis's death?
Based upon his initial report, he lists the initial report as cause of death hypoxia due to physical restraint. Other significant conditions, he says, is methamphetamine intoxication, dilated cardiomyopathy, and his manner of death is listed as homicide.
And can you explain to the jury, you said he found that it was hypoxia due to physical restraint, and then there were other contributing, I think you said, or significant contributing factors, is that right?
As it reads in this report, it says other significant conditions.
And what does that mean from a medical examiner standpoint?
Other significant conditions means that what is going on in that line is contributing or may contribute to the death, but are not solely responsible for the death.
And so if someone were to tell this jury that Dr. Clark concluded that Mr. Ellis died from a meth overdose, is that accurate?
Not completely.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, as per his report, it's saying that the methamphetamine intoxication could have contributed to the death, but the cause of death as it stands here is hypoxia due to physical restraint.
Now, did you rely on Dr. Clark's initial report and his supplemental report?
Yes.
And how did you rely on them? Tell us how that worked.
I read them primarily to look for what was found, as how he described the injuries, how he described the internal examination, how the organs weighed, so that I can get a really good understanding of the findings at autopsy, less the cause and manner of death, really the findings at autopsy that's within his report is extremely important to me.
Okay. So did you just accept his conclusion, I guess is a better question to ask you, in terms of reaching your own conclusions?
No.
And why not?
Well, my conclusion is different than his, so I didn't rely on his conclusion because it's different. But also, I think his conclusion is part of why Mr. Ellis died. It's not the complete picture of why Mr. Ellis died.
And so talk to me about his supplemental report. You said he had a supplemental report. Did Dr. Clark change his conclusion with respect to the fact that he determined that Mr. Ellis's death was a result of hypoxia due to physical restraint?
He did not change his report. He further clarified. I don't have it up on my screen anymore, but now it is. Thank you.
And
Yes.
I'm sorry, so you were saying that he further clarified. What do you mean by that?
Well, he talked about what he didn't have at the time of his report when he came up with his diagnosis, and then he has in section 4 his conclusions, where he has 3 main paragraphs where he further describes why he's come to this conclusion.
So it was kind of just supplementing as opposed to changing any conclusions with respect to it?
That's how I see it, yes.
All right. And I think you said that he determined that the manner of death was homicide. Is that right?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
That means very simply that the death was at the hands of another.
And going back to just kind of the initial report, you said that Dr. Clark concluded that Mr. Ellis died from hypoxia due to physical restraint, and that your opinion or your conclusion was different than his.
Yes.
Can you just explain to the jury what your conclusion was, and then explain to us how it is different?
So my conclusion is I call his cause of death mechanical asphyxia due to violent subdual and restraint by law enforcement officers. The contributing cause is evidence of aspiration in blood and oral contents due to spit hood placement, methamphetamine toxicity and dilatation of the heart, and manner of death is homicide.
And we'll talk a little bit more about all of those things, but can you just give us an idea of, like, what's the difference then between you saying mechanical asphyxiation due to violent subdual restraint versus hypoxia due to physical restraint?
Mechanical asphyxia can have more of an effect on a person's body than just hypoxia. I believe that it was not only hypoxia, because hypoxia played a part, but the fact that Mr. Ellis could not move his chest and his and to be able to breathe the way he needed to breathe because of his position and because of the presence of individuals on top of him. That goes to not just hypoxia, but also cardiac output, right? How his heart is functioning, as well as acidosis playing a part, which is acid buildup in your body when you're getting lack of oxygen and you're in a struggle. You can get acid buildup in your body, and so the mechanical asphyxia, and then I say due to violent subdual. So I specifically suggest that violent subdual is part of his cause of death as well. I go a little further, I think, than Dr. Clark, than just saying that he had a lack of oxygen in his tissues.
So are you saying that he didn't have hypoxia, or you're saying he did have hypoxia, but here's some additional explanation for how he got the hypoxia?
He
Or
did.
Is that all wrong? Go ahead.
He did have hypoxia, but he had other reasons for him to be dead than just the hypoxia.
Now, you told us kind of the things that you relied on in terms of it, I guess I'll call it the evidence that was collected by Dr. Clark and that he documented. Did that include photographs, diagrams of the body, his slides, those kinds of things? Is that right?
Yes.
Was there anything that Dr. Clark looked at that you weren't able to see?
I don't know.
Was there anything that you're aware of from reading his report that was you weren't able to see it in the same condition at the time of?
Not to my knowledge. I think I saw everything I saw. I'm not quite sure whether or not he saw things that I didn't see.
And did you have a chance to examine the photographs of the spit hood that Mr. Ellis was wearing at the time?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury, if you had performed the autopsy of Mr. Ellis rather than Dr. Clark, is there anything that you might have done differently?
Yes.
And what would you have done differently?
I would have taken more pictures to document all of the findings. I would have done a full dissection of Mr. Ellis's back, down the back of his arms and down the back of his legs. I would have done a deep tissue dissection of his back. I would have done a deep tissue dissection of his chest, his belly, and the front of his legs. I would have documented a layer by layer neck dissection on the front and a layer by layer neck dissection on the back. I would have taken full photos every step of the way, gaining entry into his skull. Because of the injuries on his face, I would have done a facial dissection, looking at whether or not there was any fractures of the face. So I think that's probably the extent of what I would have done differently.
And why would you do those additional dissections of those parts of the body that you talked about?
Because that, injuries, particularly acute injuries to the body, are going to start deep and raise to the surface, and they'll raise to the surface at a slower rate than someone who's dying immediately. So no one is going to really see acute bruises the way they're really going to show up until you've done a full deep dissection into the tissues. So that's important. And then he had a lateral neck hold put in place by law enforcement. And anytime there's a lateral neck hold in place, you have to do a full forensic neck so that you can get an idea of whether or not there's any soft tissue injuries. Now, there's description that suggests that there's not, but objective evidence is in addition to the description.
And just to flesh that out a little bit, I mean, you referenced it being acute. What do you mean by that?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Acute is right now, immediate. That's what acute means.
And I'm getting ready to move to another subject, and I see that we're close to the afternoon break. I didn't know if you wanted to take it now.
You want to take a break now? That's fine.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
We'll take our recess now. Please, 15 minutes or so. We do not discuss case among yourselves or anyone else. Nicolovo did forward us an email with a possible statement that would be appropriate for the jurors on the subject that we talked about. I want to thank her for that. I got a response from Mr. Fricky saying he's not completely satisfied with that. Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
Your Honor, I'm working on incorporating those. I've spoken with defense counsel, with Rick, and we'll work on that and circulate. I know the court wants to have something available by 4 o'clock.
Well, if we don't, we could, it's just going to have to be Monday. It just happens. It gives you guys more chance to think about this, too. Yeah, I haven't seen Mr. Conrad's email, but,
I just picked it up, Your Honor.
oh, well, there you go.
I probably got it when I was in the back room. Sorry.
Well, this is fairly similar to Ms. Nicolovo's. All right, so,
Your Honor, the state's has no objection to Mr. Conrad's draft.
well, I've got I actually prefer yours. For reasons I don't necessarily want to express at this moment. But it has nothing to do with either one of you personally.
We were hoping for the little badge over here, but you agreed with us on it.
So now you guys want the plaque over there, huh? Move this plaque around a lot during the course of this thing. I'm a little concerned about the proposed language that Mr. Fricky suggests. I don't want to. I think it almost is more. Alarming. And I think they already know that I already indicated that if some issue like someone discussing the case in their presence occurs, to let Mrs. Winnie know about that. I told them that at the very beginning of this whole thing. So I don't know that I need to say anything more than that. But we'll think about that. All right, let's resume with our examination of Dr. Mitchell, please. So let's have the jury. And welcome to Tacoma, Doctor. Like you're going to be spending more time with us than maybe expected.
Yes, sir. It's my pleasure.
Isn't the time to be in Washington about April when all the cherry blossoms are out in the Capitol Mall and everything?
Yeah, and April is a wonderful time.
Yeah, April and May. Weather's nice then. It's not too
It's right before
humid.
it gets really, really hot.
Yeah,
The other Washington.
yeah. The other Washington.
Yes, sir.
The first Washington.
Yes, sir.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Please be seated. I was gonna say, bonjour's got to put. Are you going to put headphones on?
Not at the, when I need them.
Okay. So I would say, go ahead then.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Mitchell, we were talking before the break about kind of what Dr. Clark did and some additional things that you would do if you had performed the autopsy. Can you tell the jury, is what you got from Dr. Clark in terms of his documentation and his information about the autopsy, was it sufficient for you to be able to reach your own conclusions and opinions in this matter?
Hold on this again.
Yes.
And how would the additional stuff that you had proposed or that you would do if you had done the autopsy, how would that affect any opinions you might have?
Well, I think I've got a problem with that because it depends on what he finds, right?
Well, that's what I'm asking. I guess the better question. Well, that's what I was getting at.
If you find something, it changes things. If you don't find anything, maybe it doesn't, right?
Sure. Is that correct, Dr.
Depends on what you
Mitchell?
find, right?
Depends on what you find.
I don't know. Should I answer that?
Yeah, don't answer because no, it's an impossible question, and
I'll move on.
I don't think it's fair to the doctor, really.
You talked about earlier that your conclusion was that it was mechanical asphyxiation due to violent subdual restraint. Can you just explain to the jury what you mean by violent subdual restraint?
That there was an altercation that was violent in nature, and part of that altercation was to restrain and subdue Mr. Ellis, and so that altercation, that rigorous and violent altercation, plays a part in his death.
Now, did you have an opportunity to review the autopsy photos that were taken by Dr. Clark?
Yes.
All right, I want to talk about some of the injuries that you observed with respect to Mr. Ellis. So if we could start, I'm going to kind of start in his head and neck area. If we could have what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 271E, 271L, and 260. I believe they've all been admitted, Your Honor.
I think so.
May I publish them?
Proceed.
Okay. If we could start by putting up 271E. And if it's easier for you, it'd be great if you want to step down if you need to, and just kind of point. So first of all, Dr. Mitchell, did Mr. Ellis have injuries to his face?
Yes. So I'm looking at State Exhibit 271E, and this is in the photo. There's a case number as well as Pierce County case number 20-0519, and you could see to the right side of his face there are brush abrasions. Abrasions are scrapes of the skin tissue. There are brush abrasions on the right side of his face, in his cheek. There's also abrasions and contusions of his eyebrow over on his forehead. There is small abrasions on the right side of his nose. And then on the left side of his face, kind of off of the picture, you can start to see that there is abrasion, contusion, meaning scrapes and bruises on the left side of his face. There's also a couple of abrasions and contusions on the left side of his forehead as well.
So let's talk about the injuries that you can see on the right side of Mr. Ellis's face.
Can you say, Doctor, would it help at all if you had like a pointer as opposed to using your hand?
I'm okay with using my hand if it's okay with you.
It's fine with me. I just thought sometimes the hand's sort of in the way of what you're trying to point at.
I don't know if you guys have an actual pointer. The laser pointer will get eaten up by the screen.
Yeah, well, I have something that looks like a bit like a pool cue.
I can use that if you
Does it
like.
work? You can use that too as well.
That's
Whatever.
probably better.
That might be better.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, you're welcome, Doctor.
All right, so let's talk about the injuries on the right side of Mr. Ellis' face that we can see most prominently in this photograph. Based on what you know and all the information that you've read in the case and the videos that you've watched, can you tell the jury, do you have an opinion as to what could have caused those injuries on the right side of Mr. Ellis' face?
Again, on the right side of Mr. Ellis's face is what I'm calling in the larger abraded contusion or bruised scrape on the right side of his face. I call it a brush abrasion for a reason. We see brush abrasions because of movement of the skin against a rough surface. We see this a lot in motor vehicle collisions when the body's moving against an asphalt surface or a concrete surface. So this is telling me that this part of his face is up against the rough surface. More than likely it's going to be the asphalt based upon all that I've seen, the ground. His face is being pushed against the ground and his face is moving while it's up against the ground. That's what's causing.
I'm going to object to the thing where he says that it's being pushed against the ground. He has no knowledge of that.
I'll ask him another question about that if you want.
I think rather than saying that's what happened, if he wanted to indicate that it's consistent with something like that, that would be fine.
You can use that language. It's consistent with. No, and I guess why do you say that it's being consistent with being pushed, Dr. Mitchell? What is it about the injury that tells you that there's pressure as opposed to just rubbing?
Well, it's not just the injury itself. You know, I've seen video footage of his face against the ground. I've seen the altercation myself, and so it's consistent with an injury that he would have gotten during the time in which he's in the altercation, and his head is against the ground, and he has a knee on the back of his neck and head. So it's consistent with the injury that would have occurred during that time frame. And the reason why, just for the injury itself, not the circumstances that I saw through the video, is that the brush abrasion suggests that there's movement of the skin against a rough surface.
And just so we can clarify, in terms of the videos, have you seen the video that was shot by the two civilians, or three videos that were shot by two civilians, the Cowden videos as well as the McDowell videos?
Yes.
Okay. So is that what you're referring to when you say you've seen the videos of the altercation?
Yes.
All right. And what about the injury on his right eyebrow area? Do you have an opinion as to what would have caused that injury?
I mean, blunt force trauma is blunt force trauma. This appears to be an abrasion and contusion. So it could be consistent with a strike or a punch. It could be consistent with the head coming in contact with the ground, or any other blunt force that would cause that injury.
All right. And then what about the injury with respect to the on the nose? And I don't know if you can zoom in on that a little bit.
Again, these are. That's much better. So these are abrasion on the nose. Again, those can be consistent with blunt force injury because they have a punctate type of appearance, a dot-like appearance. It could be consistent with gravel as well.
And in terms of this photograph, is this taken before or after Mr. Ellis's body is washed? Or do you know?
A lack of foundation is what it is.
I don't know if he can. I don't know if he knows or not.
If you're able to
If he knows, he knows. If he doesn't, he doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been washed.
Is that a standard part of the autopsy, typically to wash a body before, or wash it at some point?
Do you know if it was done here?
I don't know.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at 271L then. All right, and what does 271L show?
271L shows the left side of the face. The left side of the face has also a brush abrasion on the left side of the face on the cheek. For the record, I'm pointing to it. There is a ruler scale in the photo that reads 20-0519 for the record. There are also multiple abrasions or scrapes and contusions on the left forehead, near the eyebrow or adjacent to the eyebrow, as well as several additional abrasions on the left side of the head above the ear.
And do you have an opinion based on your review of all of the materials of what could have caused the injuries to Mr. Ellis's left side of his face?
Again, this brush abrasion, the larger brush abrasion on the left cheek, is also consistent with his face being against, moving against a rough surface, like his face being moved against the gravel or the ground. These other abrasions or contusions or bruises or scrapes are consistent with blunt force trauma. So it could be anything that is that's coming into contact with his head. It could be strikes, or it could be against the concrete below.
And what exactly does blunt force trauma mean? A term
So
that
blunt force trauma, sorry to interrupt, blunt force trauma is a category of injuries that we find in forensic medicine, a category of injuries in general, that include scrapes or abrasions, bruises or contusions, lacerations or ripping of the skin, and fractures. The others areas within the injury constellation of blunt force trauma are what we call hematomas, when blood collects underneath in an area that is subject to a blunt object. And blunt force trauma is because those injuries are from a blunt object. It can be a ground, it could be a bat, it could be a fist, it could be a kick. Those blunt objects against the human body are going to cause blunt force trauma.
And do you know the blunt force trauma injuries that you see on the left side of Mr. Ellis's face, could those be caused by punches from an officer? Could they be caused?
Is it consistent with being,
Is it consistent with being punched by one of the officers?
Not all of them. The ones on the forehead, maybe underneath the eye, could be consistent with that. The large brush abrasion on the left side of the face would not be consistent with being punched by an officer.
All right, let's take a look at Exhibit 260. And what does Exhibit 260 show?
Exhibit 260 also has, this is the right side of the face, a lateral view or a side view of the right side of the face. There is a ruler in place acting as a scale that is labeled 20-0519. And there is a large abraded contusion, also a brush abrasion, around the right side of the face. Again, there is a bruising of the eyebrow just above the right eye, as well as some small abrasions on the right side of the head above the ear.
Now, you said brush abrasions. If we zoom in on that photo on the cheek, are you able to see anything within that injury that supports your conclusion that it's a brush abrasion?
Well, the appearance of it is a brush abrasion, definitively. This is the characteristic of a brush abrasion. I don't see anything within the wound that would indicate where that brush abrasion is coming from.
And would the brush abrasion be consistent with strikes of a fist of an officer?
Not the brush abrasion, no.
What about any of the other injuries we see on the left side of Mr. Ellis's face?
This is
I'm
the
sorry,
right,
the right side. Sorry.
on the right side of his face, again, the injuries of the eyebrow above his eye would be consistent with a strike.
All right. Let's see. Did you also have an opportunity to look at some photographs of Mr. Ellis's eyes that were taken at the scene?
Yes.
If we could take a look at 271A, please. I believe that's already been admitted, Your Honor. Right, can you, Dr. Mitchell, can you just explain to the jury what is in this photograph of 271A?
So this is the front view of Mr. Ellis's face. His left eye is being held open, and there's some red discoloration across his left eye. That red discoloration, it looks like early decompositional change.
And do you know what petechial hemorrhages are?
I do.
And what are they?
Petechial hemorrhages will happen if there is a flow from, so let me back up. The blood is pumped. Blood is pumped from the heart through arteries. It hits a capillary bed, and that's where nutrient is exchanged, and then it returns through veins. There's higher pressure in arteries than in veins. When there is pressure placed on a vein, you can close the vein up, but the blood that's pumping from the artery will still pump into this very fragile area of capillaries. When that happens, there'll be a busting of those blood vessels. And you can see that in the eyes, you can see it in the mouth, in the mucosa when that occurs.
In this case, did you see whether or not there was some form of restraint to Mr. Ellis's neck?
Yes.
And what did you see in the videos?
I saw that he was placed in a lateral neck hold.
And would you expect a lateral neck hold to automatically or always cause petechial hemorrhages?
No, it doesn't always have to cause petechial hemorrhages.
And what about putting pressure on somebody's back when they're in the prone position, kneeling on their back? Would that cause petechial hemorrhages?
It can cause petechial hemorrhages, yes.
Does it always cause petechial hemorrhages?
No, it doesn't have to always cause petechial hemorrhages.
All right. I have you take a look at Exhibit 263, which I believe has also been admitted, Your Honor. Go ahead.
Judge, can I ask one clarifying? Can I have audio the witness for 1 second? Just a clarifying question.
Sure.
So the exhibit that you were just shown, doctor, you didn't test. You don't believe that that's petechial hemorrhage, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So the discoloration of the eye, that's not consistent with what would be considered petechial hemorrhage.
Your Honor, this is cross-examination.
I just-
I'm going to permit it.
Thank you.
The answer is no.
Okay. Thank you.
Continue.
263, please. Could you blow that up? And what is shown in this photograph, or what observations did you make about injuries to Mr. Ellis's mouth?
This is, again, Mr. Ellis's mouth. You can see that this is the top of his mouth with his mustache, and this is the bottom of his mouth. His chin is underneath this scale that's shown, and for the record, I'm pointing to the photo. And then he has some focal injuries of the mucosa on the bottom left corner of the lip and the top right corner of the lip. There's also some chipped teeth also in the photograph as well.
And what do you mean by focal injuries in the mucosa?
So there is, when we talked about blunt injuries, we talked about those types. This would be considered a small laceration of the corner of the lip. The lip has skin, and then the skin turns into mucosa. Mucosa is what's inside the body covering the mouth. Skin is on the outside. It's a different type of covering. And so this is on that interface. When I say this, the small laceration of the left corner bottom lip is at the interface or the junction between where the skin of the lip meets the mucosa of the lip.
And do you have an opinion as to how Mr. Ellis might have sustained those injuries based on your review of the materials?
These could have been sustained during the altercation.
And were those significant to you for any other reasons in terms of the injuries to the mouth?
Well, he's bleeding. These injuries would have caused bleeding in his mouth. There's evidence of bleeding on the inside of the spit hood. There's also evidence of blood inside of his airway. The blood that is also on his face could have gotten into his mouth or would have gotten into his mouth, and that's why I see blood in his lower airway. So these injuries on his mouth would have been consistent with some of the reasons why we see blood in his airway.
And what's the significance of seeing blood in Mr. Ellis's airway?
Well, it's important for me to look for any time that there's injury to the face, to look for whether or not there is aspiration of anything on the outside, aspiration of contents. And aspiration means that you're breathing in something that you shouldn't, whether it's food or whether it's blood or food or blood is probably the biggest things that you shouldn't find in an airway. And so when I saw blood in the airway, I wanted to make sure that I could understand where this blood would be coming from, and in part that blood would be coming from the injuries to his mouth.
We'll take a look at 271F, which I believe has also been admitted. All right, and can you just explain to the jury what this photo shows?
So anytime we do an autopsy, we take pictures of all the surfaces of the body, and this picture is showing the back of Mr. Ellis's head and back, his buttocks, and a portion of the posterior surface of the back of his upper thighs.
And were you able to observe any injuries with respect to the back of Mr. Ellis?
It's really difficult to determine whether or not there's any injuries to the back. There is an area that's discolored underneath. That would be his left side of his back. There's also a discoloration involving the back of his left tricep. Could be a potential area of contusion. There's some old scars, and there's an area in the middle of his back that may be a small abrasion on the small of his back. There weren't additional photos taken of this area for confirmation.
And you said with respect to the on the back of his tricep and on the left lower part of his back, there's potential contusions. Are you able to say definitively that they are there?
No.
And why not?
They weren't described by the original pathologist, so that's one reason I rely on that. And the dissection that I expressed that I would have done would have definitively shown that contusion.
If we could take a look at Exhibit 254, which again I believe has already been admitted. And can you just explain to the jury what 254 shows?
So 254 is the lower leg and knee of Mr. Ellis, again with the case number 20-0519. And these, again, are abrasion. They're scrapes in and around or involving the left knee. There is a small portion of the right knee that's also exposed in the photograph, and you can see that there's scrapes and abrasions of the right knee as well.
And do you have an opinion as to how Mr. Ellis would have sustained these injuries, given all of the information you've reviewed?
Yeah, they appear to have a brush appearance as well, so they would have been being in contact with a blunt surface. So they're consistent with his knees coming in contact with the ground.
With the pavement?
With the pavement.
All right, I want to ask you now about injuries to Mr. Ellis's hands and wrists. Did you look at photographs from the scene that showed injuries to Mr. Ellis's hands and wrists?
Yes.
All right, if we could have you take a look at, and I believe these have been admitted. No, have not. All right, so I'll have you sit back there a moment. You could show Dr. Mitchell 181, 182, 183, 184, and 185, please. Are you familiar with these photographs, Dr. Mitchell?
I just saw 181 and 182 so far.
Okay.
183 I've seen. And 184. So yes, I've seen these. And then 185 I've seen, yes.
Are these photographs that you relied on, that you received, first of all, as part of the case materials?
Yes.
And did you rely on them in terms of forming your opinions in this case?
Yes.
I would offer 181 through 185.
I'm going to raise an objection. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm not sure there's a proper foundation to be admitted through this witness.
I can offer them subject to the calling the people that took the photographs, which I intend to do.
Is he just on the stand?
No. Be sheriff's office investigators.
Well, I don't know where these came from.
These are photographs that were taken at the scene that we'll be calling the sheriff's investigators who can testify regarding those photographs to lay the additional foundation. So I can offer them conditionally.
Well, don't you have similar photographs taken by Mr. Adslab?
I do have different photos, yes.
Rather than get into these, why not go into those? As I say,
Simply
there's
because of the exposure on them, Your Honor. But if I can do that, but I think that these photographs, like I said, would lay the additional foundation for. But the lighting is better, frankly. It captures them better than the ones that were taken later.
well, I can't get into these exhibits until you've got a foundation for where they came from.
Okay. All right, then
So
let's take
proceed
a look
however you want to proceed.
We'll proceed with 271 G, H, and I. If you want to step down again, these have already been admitted, Dr. Mitchell.
Okay.
All right, did you observe any injuries to Mr. Ellis's wrists and hands?
Yes.
And perhaps we can blow that up just a little bit more. And can you just explain to the jury what we're looking at here?
So this is the left hand, and you can see that there's an abrasion of the wrist here. Has that same type of brush appearance. Small type of abrasions here and here, again, consistent with gravel and on the ground. But what's most interesting is that you have this kind of contusion, abrasion, and mark that is semicircular. It's at the upper portion of the, well, with the body in normal anatomic position, it would be the lower portion of the wrist, in the dorsal part of the hand, so the back of the hand. Here at the top of this photo, you can start to make out a tram track appearance. Where
What do you mean by that, tram track appearance?
So a tram track appearance would be two blunt areas coming into contact with the skin. And then they're what we say contiguous or connected to a pattern that circles the wrist. And then down at the bottom of the wrist, you can see these tram track impressions as well. This is consistent with a handcuff. This is consistent with it, especially with areas of abrasion and contusion, is evidence of the violent restraint or subdual.
And have you seen those types of injuries before as a result of handcuffs
Yes,
in your role as a medical examiner?
yes.
Now, you said this is Mr. Ellis's left hand, is that right?
Yes.
Take a look at 271H, please.
I'm sorry, can I add one thing? I
Yes, of course.
apologize.
Can we go back, please?
There's blood up at the top of the hand. This area here would be dried blood. There are focal small punctate abrasions on the top of the hand as well, just for completeness.
And do you have an opinion as to what could cause those small punctate injuries that you see on the hands?
Again, these punctate abrasions make me believe that it would be my opinion that they're coming from gravel.
Or from the road surface? Gravel
Yes.
on the road surface?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we take a look at 271. I'm sorry. It was 271G. 271G. All right, we take a look at 271H, please. And again, if you could just kind of blow it up a little bit. All right, can you just walk us through what you see on this photograph?
Can you back that up a little bit?
Oh, sure. Can you back it up?
I believe this is still the left hand. I don't have context to the photograph, but this is the prominence of the thumb here. Most of the time when medical examiners take pictures, when they have the scale is facing the feet. So that helps me know that this is the thumb. This is the crease of the thumb that's peeking out of this photo here. And so it's that same wrist. This is that same brush abrasion, and the wrist is turned a bit. And for the record, I'm turning my left wrist to demonstrate to the jury. And then you can see even a little bit better this kind of parallel tram track appearance where you have a pink area here, a pink area here, and then a kind of a devoid or an absence of the pink in between. That tells me that this is a patterned abrasion contusion of the wrist consistent with handcuffs.
And just so we're clear, you said consistent with handcuffs. In your experience, is it just because anyone who has handcuffs put on is going to have this kind of mark or injury?
No, not just handcuffs. There has to be force applied to the handcuffs against the skin, considerable amount of force that's going to lead to abrasions and contusions that you see here.
And what do you mean by force and a considerable amount of force?
Pulling on the handcuffs. And
Against the skin?
against the skin, and it'll drive the handcuffs into the skin, into the wrist.
All right, and then anything else on this photograph that also shows other injuries to the left hand?
No.
All right, we can take a look at, I think it's 271. H? Or did we do H and I? I'm sorry, then I must have missed G. Okay. No, did I do G also? Okay, sorry, thank you. Someone's keeping track of me. All right, so did you, and if you want to refer to your report, you can, but did you see these tram tracks that you're talking about? Was it on both the left and the right hand of Mr. Ellis?
I will refer to my report.
If it's helpful, I can have you just look at some photographs that weren't admitted, but that you, I believe, reviewed and relied on as part of your report.
Yes, it would be both wrists.
Okay. And so in the photographs that we looked at, that the court didn't admit, but exhibits 181 through 185, are those injuries to both the left and the right from the tram tracks from the cuffs, are they visible in those photographs as well?
Fortunately, without seeing the actual photos with those numbers, I wouldn't be able to tell you if indeed that's what they show.
I'll show those to you. Actually, Corey, can you just put those up, 181 through 185? Please.
It's on the screen.
I see it. I see 181 here.
If you could just kind of click through those for Dr. Mitchell. Yeah. Your Honor, I would ask under Evidence Rule 703. Just want to make my record.
I've
Thank you.
already done that once, I'm not gonna do that over and over again.
With respect to those photographs, 181 through 185, do those photographs also depict the tram tracks that you said with respect to the handcuffs on both the left and the right hands?
Yes.
All right, I want to talk about other injuries. Were there injuries to in and around Mr. Ellis's ankles or marks on Mr. Ellis's ankles that you found to be important?
Yes.
All right, if we could take a look at Exhibit 293, I believe, which has been admitted, Your Honor. May I publish? 293, yeah.
Give me a second here. $293's been admitted, proceed.
All right, and again, if you could kind of step down here and show the jury what you observed in Exhibit 293 with respect to injuries to the ankle or the lower part of the leg of Mr. Ellis.
So again, this is Exhibit 293, case numbers here, 20-0519, has the decedent's name in place. There's also a scale in place. At the edge of the photo, there's an abrasion of the shin of the right leg. So this is the right leg that I'm pointing to. But here, there is I'm sorry, it might be easier to see blown all the way out. I'm sorry. So there's a abrasion and a contusion here on the lower leg, and if you can see, that abrasion and contusion goes across the lower leg, and then there's another abraded contusion that's going across the leg, and this is also a patterned abrasion, a patterned contusion on the lower leg, It's much thicker in measurement than what you would see with a handcuff. And so it's consistent with a strap being placed on the lower leg, on the lower right leg. The lower left leg, there's no clear evidence of that same strap mark on the left leg.
And when you say a strap, based on your knowledge of this case, do you have an opinion as to what that mark on Mr. Ellis's leg was caused by?
This would be consistent with the hobble strap that would be placed around his leg.
And can you explain to the jury how it is that the hobble strap would leave that patterned mark on Mr. Ellis's leg?
Well, the strap is a cinched kind of canvas type of strap, and can be cinched up against the leg and wrapped before it's connected to the handcuffs behind someone's back. And so there would be part of that restraint would leave this mark on the right lower extremity or the right leg.
All right. And did you also see evidence of the strap mark on Mr. Ellis's right leg from photographs of the scene?
Yes.
And did you rely on those photographs in terms of reaching your opinion with respect to what caused these marks on Mr. Ellis's lower leg?
Yes.
If I could have you, if you want to take your seat again for a moment, if I could have you take a look at, and again, just for the witness, 178, 179, and 180. Those will come up on your screen, Dr. Mitchell.
Yes.
And what are those?
178, 179, 180 are the lower leg with the sock and sneaker in place with evidence of that strap mark that was just described, but at the scene of death.
And what about photograph 180?
180 is that same strap mark on the lower right leg of the decedent with a ruler in place, a scale in place.
And are you aware of whether or not there was a strap that was used to bind Mr. Ellis's legs to his hands?
Yes.
And what is your understanding, or how do you know that? What do you understand it to have been?
I saw pictures of the actual strap.
You know what it's called?
No, I don't.
And based on reviewing that strap, do you have an opinion as to whether or not that strap in this case could have caused the injuries that we just looked at in 293, and also what you just looked at in 178 through 180?
Yes.
What's your opinion on that?
That strap is that these marks on Mr. Ellis's right lower leg are consistent with the use of the strap that was shown to be used.
And you said that there would be some sort of force or impact on it. Is that correct, to create the mark?
Yes.
And can you just explain, based on the injuries that you saw on both his hands and his wrists, if you have an opinion as to how Mr. Ellis was restrained?
He would have been restrained in what they call a prone hobble position. Some would call it a hog tie.
And describe what you mean by that.
With arms behind the back, feet pulled together, and then the feet, and for the record, I'm kind of demonstrating it on myself in my chair.
And if you want to come out of your chair and demonstrate it, that would make it easier.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's easier or not.
It is.
Okay.
So it would be that the hands are behind the back. It's not clear whether or not the thumbs are out or the thumbs are in, but it would be behind the back, and then the ankles and feet, both feet, brought up and connected to the handcuffs with that hobble strap against the ankle.
And based on the injuries that you saw to Mr. Ellis's hands, you said that in terms of what, do you have an opinion as to which way his hands were facing, meaning palms toward his butt or palms out based on the injuries?
Yes, it's. I would say no. I don't know whether or not his thumbs are out against his butt or they're in towards the middle of his back. I can't tell based upon those injuries.
And you said that it would have been connected. So can you just help us understand how it would then cause the injuries that you saw?
Well, the hobble strap has a hook on the end, like that some of us, like me, old guys, wear with their keys on their belt loop. It has a hook like that, and that hook is usually engaged into the middle of the handcuffs. And so he's 70 inches, 218 pounds on his belly once that strap is engaged properly, maybe there's about.
Yeah, I object to the reference to the size of the hobble itself.
I'll ask him some questions about it. Have you seen the actual measurements of the hobble?
Yes.
And how long was the hobble in this case?
The hobble was, depending on how they measured it, ranged from 28 inches to 22 inches.
And so, I'm sorry, can you go ahead and continue your answer with respect to how it created the injuries that you observed, in your opinion?
So fully engaged, the hobble would probably have about 10 inches between the feet and the wrists behind him.
And what's
Your Honor, it lacks foundation. It also hasn't been previously disclosed to us.
Hold on a second. Well, it's 3:59, so I'll excuse the jury until Monday, and we can kind of discuss this amongst ourselves between now and Monday. So counsel will stay behind. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll excuse you. Have a great weekend. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves with anyone else, and do not permit anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence. Thank you. I'm not ruling on it at this point.